Good morning, everyone. The clock says it's 1 minute after 9, and the bell says it agrees with me. So please come on in, find your seat. Welcome to Linder Church of Christ. Our Sunday morning auditorium class still is studying Genesis, in particular Genesis Part 2. So we're currently at chapter 37. You recall last week, we ended up with looking at Esau's family. He's the father of the Edomites. We looked at the territory that they finally inhabited. We looked at some of the leaders that were part of that particular nation as they grew, and we gained an appreciation for the growth of Edom. The things that they did, they were organized, they became a kingdom, and thus fulfilling the promise that was given to Esau. Today we're going to talk about Joseph. Now we're back onto the family of Israel. We're going to look at Joseph. He is the 11th son of Jacob. Mother is Rachel. And I would dare say that most everyone has heard of Joseph. There's some things that might come to your mind. When I think of Joseph, I have, this word association game people play. When you hear Joseph, what do you think of? What's the most associated thing you think about Joseph?
Devoted.
He was devoted, okay. Somebody said coat. Coat of many colors. Comes to my mind. Anything else? Egypt. See, so there's some things that pop into our mind because many of us have studied Joseph. And I would even suggest to you that the world has pretty well heard of Joseph. We're going to get into a couple of items that you may recall. So this is a very popular story that we all get the opportunity to study. And so before we go any further, let's approach the throne of God in prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful that we've had this week and we have this morning. We're here to study your word, to worship you after this hour. We're so grateful that we have the history before us so that we can understand what your people went through, the humanity, their decisions, their challenges, so that we can learn from them, number one, and number two, to understand how being human, the humans you created, is a challenge for us, and that we have many decisions that come our way in our life, and we have choices. Pray that you'll forgive us of our sins. And in Christ's name we pray. Amen. So turn over to chapter 37. I said to my wife this morning, I said, wife. Yeah, she got her to look up. You should have seen that look. It was priceless. I said, wife, I wish God had written a PG version of the Bible so that it would be a lot more easier to talk about. It would be less difficult to discuss if he had only selected less flawed people. And she says, oh, like us? So I'm just pointing that out. This is a challenging portion. You come across things that are difficult, some things that we're embarrassed to even talk about sometimes. We're uncomfortable. And so while Joseph may not be that uncomfortable, just wait till you get to chapter 38. It becomes even more uncomfortable. But the point is, there's stories that God has provided us that we can learn from. We just need to look at what the scriptures talk about, what to say, and realize that as people began to review it and talk about it and think about it, they find ways of enlarging upon it. They find ways of pulling out rules for their lives and those that they're going to teach to others. And so thus, we have a lot of different opinions out there, a lot of different views of things. And so we need to be very careful as we look at those views when we compare them to what the scriptures say. Jacob was living in the land of Canaan. So let's kind of get started and refresh our memory as to where he's at. He's down in this area at this point in time. You may recall that Shechem is up in this area. And we're going to learn about a little town north of there called Dothan today. It's probably about 10, 12 miles, give or take a kilometer or two. And so this area is where they're living. And it starts out in Genesis 37, verse 1. Jacob lived in the land of Canaan where his father had lived. This is a family history of Jacob. So now we start this. You know, last week we were looking at the family of Esau. Let's see. Joseph was a young man, 17 years old. He and his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, cared for the flocks. Joseph gave his father bad reports about his brothers. Since Joseph was born when his father Israel was old, Israel loved him more than his other sons. He made Joseph a special robe with long sleeves. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more than he loved them, they hated him. They hated their brother and could not speak to him politely. Now, if you're a King James person, or if you grew up on King James, like I did, you immediately go, this passage is not correct. And why is that? There's something about that coat. Not many colors, right. So there's something missing in this passage, isn't it? Well, there is, as we look at this, we'll get into that in just a second, so hold that thought. You see that he's 17 years old, so he's a young man. Anybody been 17 before? Once? Yeah, once. You remember those times, don't you? I know the other day when my back hurt, I wished I was still 17. He's a young man. He's full of life. He's the son of an older man. Now, depending on who you read and how you go through this study of Jacob, he's between 74 and 91 years old. Now, I did read one man who was very adamant about trying to figure out his age. And so I'm sitting there going, 74 is pretty old, so I'll take it. 91 is pretty old, I'll take it. So the point is, Jacob was an older man when this young man was born, when his 11th son was born. And he was his favorite. It doesn't necessarily say why he was his favorite, but you can imagine some of the speculation that's out there. He gives his father, as this translation says, bad reports. King James says evil reports. The fact is, I think what that's trying to say to us is this young man was coming and telling his father the honest truth about things. What his brothers were doing. Now, what do we call someone who does that as a sibling? A tattleteller. Yes, that's correct. So Joseph gets this bad, reputation among his brothers. He's a tattletale. He's going to tell Dad. So make sure you take him away when we do these things. And so here we have this beloved son, this older father, gives his son a special garment. Many of us grew up understanding that to be a coat of many colors. And we know the stories about that talks about that coat of many colors and what it represents. You may even have heard of a song that was written by Dolly Parton called My Coat of Many Colors. And it illustrates the love that a mother has to her daughter. And they're in a very poor situation, and all they have is a box of rags or cloths left over, pieces of cloth. If I know my grandmother sewed, my wife sews, there's this closet full of pieces and parts that someday may be used. Now, we men, we laugh at them. You never finished, you don't use that. And then she goes out to our garage and says, what's this box of stuff? Well, there's screws and there's nuts and there's stuff. I might be able to use them. So the point is, guys, don't be too critical. Every woman that sews, that loves to do that, needs that kind of assortment of potential parts and pieces of the next quilt she's going to make for you. And you'll be warm, so appreciate that. And so Jacob gives this special garment to Joseph because he very much loved him. And so the story that Dolly Parton wrote about is the love that was given, that she had for her daughter, that she was willing to spend the time to gather these pieces and parts together to make her a coat, and to if you will, to make her feel better about this garment that looks like pieces of cloth just kind of sewn together to make her feel better about it. She tells the story about this coat of many colors that Jacob gave Joseph. And you may recall the song has the little girl going to school, everybody making fun of her, but she knew in her heart this was the love my mother has for me. And so here, whether it was a coat of many colors, or whether it was a full-sleeved robe, a coat of many colors, a coat reaching to his feet, an ornament tunic, a silk robe, or a fine woolen cloth, or cloak rather, his brothers hated him, and they were unable to speak politely to them. Have you ever felt a certain way towards someone, or had somebody feel a certain way to you, that they couldn't even greet you with a hello, how's your day? These brothers were filled with a deep dislike for their younger brother. Now you might look at your translations you're reading and see how they translated. NIV has a footnote that basically says something to the effect of this particular Hebrew word. It's not exceptionally clear what it could be translated, what it actually is translating. Think about this garment, if you will. Some have suggested it's just stripes. Some have said that it has ornate things on it, pictures. You know how we dress up our garments. More gals do this more so than men do, guys. But we like our frilly stuff too, if it's leather, and we enjoy taking our garments and making them attractive and appealing to us and to others, we think. And so this was something special. And this coat is so important to this story. I still see it as a coat of many colors. I've colored that as a little boy. My children have colored that. How many of you have colored a picture similar to this? How many teachers here have given it out to color? And then we tell it. My problem was I couldn't stay in the lines. So I thought about coloring it just because, but I said, no, I won't do that. But the fact still, this coat represents the hatred, or represents rather the love that this beaming older man has of his son. And then you look in the background and you see the faces of his brothers. They have on their angry faces. They are not happy at all. Yes, David.
Comment on the father. For the others, it creates jealousy.
Yep. I've been asked to comment on the fact that the father treats one child more favorable than the other, and we frown upon that. Having been a father, and still am, yes, it's difficult. Because, there are some children, matter of fact, I read this one passage where good children want to obey their fathers and do the things, and mothers, and do the things that they want them to do because they're good children. I agree with that. Having been a child, that's difficult for a child to do. And really the challenge is, how do you show love to all your children? How do you do that? And some say, well, it's easy. You just show them you show them equal treatment. And I agree with that. But I tell you what, having been a father, some are more easier to show equal treatment to than others. Ruth?
The reason why Joseph was so special to him, he was the son of Rachel, and he loved Rachel.
Right. And Ruth's pointing out that Jacob loved Rachel. And you recall the story that we looked at. He loved her much His heart was just beaming for her, but yet he was tricked. But yet he still loved her, and she was barren for the longest, and this was a son in his old age. And so you can understand that. It's still a challenge either way. So as we continue on, yes.
Jacob's favoritism was a source of grief for him and Joseph and everyone in the family.
Yes, Larry points out that Jacob's favoritism to Joseph was a source of grief not only to Jacob, but the entire family. So begin in verse 5. One time Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him even more. Joseph said, "Listen to the dream I had. We were in the field tying bundles of wheat together. My bundle stood up, and your bundles of wheat gathered around it and bowed down to it." Now, as a kid, I wasn't quite sure what that meant. Bundles of wheat, that is. I got the bowing down part. Just didn't know what the bundles of wheat were. I mean, I grew up in a city. And I thought about looking for bundles of wheat bowing down, but you get the picture because you probably colored the picture. But basically, when you look back at that time, it was an agrarian society. Remember, his brothers are tending the flocks, but now they're out gathering wheat also at this point. Have gathered wheat. And so what you do is you cut the plant, you take the stalks of the plant, you put them in a bundle, and then you tie them so that you can pick them up and carry them much more easily to where they, what do they call that process? Thresh the grain out so that you can make, what do you make with wheat? Flour. And what do you make with flour? Bread. See, there's a method to their madness. They want to eat. They want bread. And so this is an important example to them because this is a lot of labor going out there and getting. Is there anyone that's harvested wheat in here? Yes. Does it take a bit of work? A little bit, but you did it with the machines, right? But did you actually get out there and cut it with your hands? You had a machine doing that part, right? Yeah. Well, it still worked, though, either way, right? Even when you got a robot with you, it still worked. So lots of work going on here. And so the brothers, they understood that this was a dream that really made them very uncomfortable. They were very uncomfortable with this dream. And so much so that they hated him even more. His second dream, I saw the moon. Brothers, let's see, wait a minute. Well, in verse 8, the response of his brothers was, "Do you really think you will be king over us? Do you truly think you will rule over us?" His brothers hated him even more because of his dreams and what he had said. Now, Joseph then had another dream. Now, you'd think after the response he got, he would kind of keep this dream to himself, but he doesn't. And he told his brothers about it also. He said, "Listen, I had another dream. I saw the moon, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down to me." Joseph also told his father about this dream, but his father scolded him, saying, "What kind of dream is this? Do you really believe that your mother, your brothers, and I will bow down to you?" Joseph's brothers were jealous of him. Joseph's brothers were jealous of him, but his father thought about what all these things could mean. So as he shares this with his family, the brothers are really irritated. The father is scolding him too because you think, he's the 11th son. He may not be the 12th son, but he is the 11th, which means there's 10 brothers ahead of him. So he's kind of the least to be expected to be king over them. And so they're very put off by this. The brothers were jealous. The father thought about what this could mean. And of course, most of us in here know what this means, right? It's looking down into the future. It's telling the future of what's going to happen with this family. And we go, hey, yeah, this is what this means. But at that time, when he said that, they had no clue. They didn't know what was coming down. And you will see that when we get to that whenever he meets his brothers again in Egypt. But at this point, they're just disappointed with him, which is an understatement. They hated him. They were upset with him.
They hate him so bad that they're the ones who put him in that position.
Yep. Ruth was saying they hate him so deeply, so intensely, but yet they're the ones that put him in that situation to where his dreams come true, so to say. All right, one day, let me catch up here. One day Joseph's brothers went to Shechem to graze their father's flocks. Israel said to Joseph, "Go to Shechem where your brothers are grazing the flocks." Joseph answered, "I will go." His father said, "Go and see if your brothers and the flocks are all right. Then come back and tell me." So Joseph's father sent him from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph came to Shechem, a man found him wandering in the field and asked him, "What are you looking for?" Joseph answered, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing the flocks?" The man said, "They have already gone. I heard them say they were going to Dothan." So Joseph went to look for his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now there's many stories, lessons that I've heard from this. One of them was that Joseph answered his father in a very positive, "I will go." It doesn't give you any context about, well, did they discuss it? Did they talk about it? Did Joseph say, well, I do have a date tomorrow night. I'm not going to be able to make that, Dad. Did he have any kind? No, it's just, "I will go." And so the lesson that is usually produced from this, or at least comes out of this, is that when you're called, you need to answer and go. So when the Lord calls, when your parents ask you to do something, you need to respond and do it immediately. And so that's what Joseph did. I would also point out to you that earlier we heard that Joseph was willing to tell the truth. At least if you interpret the evil reports, the bad reports, equals him telling that his brothers were doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. And so Jacob trusted his son Joseph to go and check on his brothers and see what they're up to and bring back a report. And so he was willing to do that. Now you got to remember too, he's about 17. "Dad, you want me to go on a trip? You want me to take off and go north?" "On my own." There's no indication that he took any other servants with him, because the brothers talk about, here comes Joseph. It doesn't say how he got there. Doesn't say, did he bring along a couple donkeys? He just took off. And I was 17, I would have enjoyed that trip. That would have been fun. Going out alone, taking my gun, well, at that time, my bow, or something of some kind, and just seeing the countryside. What a trip, huh? But he did what his father asked, out, and he went forward. However, Joseph's brothers saw him coming from far away. Before he reached him, they made a plan to kill him. They said to each other, "Here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him and throw his body into one of the wells. We can tell our father that a wild animal killed him. Then we will see what will become of his dreams." There's an animal named Scar. What movie is that? Lion King? What's one of his lines? "No, silly, we're going to kill him." I don't know why that sticks out, but Scar is a pathetic character. And here I see these brothers pathetically saying, "Let's kill him." That's how deep their hatred was. That they were willing, and they purposely said, "We're going to get rid of this dreamer." But Reuben heard their plan and saved Joseph, saying, "Let's not kill him. Don't spill any blood. He says, don't spill any blood. Throw him into this well here in the desert, but don't hurt him. It says here, Reuben planned to save Joseph later and send him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they pulled off his robe with long sleeves, or you could insert his coat of many colors, and threw him into the well. It was empty, and there was no water in it. Now, put yourself in Joseph's shoes. You're doing what your father asked. You're being an obedient son. You're coming to your brothers who are tending the flocks. They're your brothers. What's this notion about family? We take care of each other, right? We're always there for one another. Families, you need families to survive. And no matter who your family, what if somebody says you can maybe choose your neighbors, but you can't choose your families, your family members. You can choose your friends, but not your sister, your siblings, and things like that. But still, there's a bond that should have kept them together. And I've got an illustration here in a little bit that kind of shows that. All of a sudden, where's my family? I'm all alone. Reuben stood up. He heard the plan. He objected. Now, who is Reuben? Which son is he? He's the oldest son. He's number one. How many firstborn do we have in the audience? Okay. Were you responsible in any way, if you had siblings, for the behavior and the care of your siblings? And if something went wrong, your sibling got in trouble, who got in trouble for the sibling got in trouble that you were supposed to be over? You did, right? You were taken to task. Reuben, I suggest to you, being the firstborn, his heart was concerned about how his youngest brother was. Even though he didn't like the dream, he didn't like his brother's attitude, he didn't like the story being told, but something about Reuben's heart said, hey, this is my brother. Don't kill him. He was concerned about his father, because he was going to send him back. According to the text, he was going to go back to that well, pull him out, and send him back to his father. He was thinking of his father, his love for his father, even though he never received that coat of many colors. So when Joseph came to his brother, they pulled off his coat. They threw him in the well, and Reuben hoped to come to him later. However, while Joseph was in the well, the brothers sat down to eat. When they looked up, they saw a group of Ishmaelites traveling from Gilead to Egypt. Their camels were carrying spices, balm, and myrrh. Then Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and hide his death? Let's sell him to these Ishmaelites. Then we will not be guilty of killing our brother. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And the other brothers agreed. So when the Midianites' traders came by, the brothers took Joseph out of the well and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 8 ounces of silver, and the Ishmaelites took him to Egypt. Now, why Judah did this? Why did Judah have this compassion for his brother? I don't know. You could say it was providential, but and it's in God's will that this happened, and that's true. But at this point, Judah said, let's sell him. And when you look at this illustration there, you can see the brothers gathered around these coins that are being maybe split up between them. So they had a profit. And you see the young boy, the 17-year-old, being led away by this trader. He's looking back. If you'll check his gaze, he's looking back at his brothers. His hand is reaching back. You're my family. Don't let me go. Take me back. Help me. You're my brothers. But yet, obviously, they have their back turned to him. They have no compassion for their brother. They hate him so bad. One time they wanted to kill him. They were convinced by Reuben not to kill him. Reuben's intent was to go back and get him and pull him out of that well and send him back to his father that Reuben loved, the son that Jacob loved. He was going to send him back. Judah said, let's sell him. We gain nothing by killing him. And he has this logic, well, he's our brother. He's our flesh and blood. What do we gain by it? And so they take this opportunity and sell him. How would you feel? Being sold by your brothers, and you had nothing you could do about that. There was no one for you to reach out to. When Reuben came back to the well, and Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes to show he was upset. Then he went back to his brothers and said, the boy is not there. What shall I do? The brothers killed a goat and dipped Joseph's robe in its blood. Then they brought the long-sleeved robe to their father and said, we found this robe. Look it over carefully and see if it is your son's robe. Now, Reuben apparently was not privy to this sale to the Ishmaelites. He was gone whenever he was sold, apparently. And can you imagine how this oldest brother, this oldest sibling, those of you who are firstborn, can you imagine, how did you feel when you couldn't find a sibling that you were responsible for because they wandered off? You were frantic. I know as a father, I've lost a child or two in a store. It can be very, where is, you're looking around, you're struggling. Where is, you want to find them. You have lost something of value that's very valuable to you. And Reuben again comes back, he comes back to the well. Joseph is gone. Have you ever gone and looked for something, you knew it was there yesterday, and you open the door and it's gone? Now this only relates a little bit. We were camped at a site in California, and on the back of our trailer we had this cooler with a lid on it. It's got wheels on it. It's pretty cool. You roll it around, put our sodas in it, put ice on it, as opposed to you walk into the trailer, getting them out. We thought we were clever doing all that. One evening I go grab a soda, sit down and enjoy it around the campfire. The next morning I go back there to get a bottle of water. It's not there. It disappeared. It rolled off. I don't know where it went, but I was surprised. Now imagine if I really loved that cooler, the way that Reuben, the firstborn, knew and loved that young man, his brother, and looked down and the well was empty. Now it doesn't necessarily say that they immediately sold him, but apparently he just wasn't aware of the plan. So the brothers said to him, the brothers kill a goat. They dip Joseph's robe in its blood. I'm sure you've colored one or two pictures when you were a kid and you put red on it as blood as you were looking through the story, and they brought it to Joseph. Or brought it to Jacob. Jacob looked it over and said, this is my son's robe. Some savage animals have eaten him. My son Joseph has been torn to pieces. That's the conclusion you made by the evidence that was presented. Now, of course, today, I would have gone, can you test that blood for DNA, make sure it's human blood? We would know right away, no, that's not human blood. Where's my son? But yet, didn't have technology back then. The coat was presented. Jacob tore his clothes and put on rough clothes to show that he was upset. And he continued to be sad about his son for a long time. If he'd only known that his son was alive, he was sad for a long time. Have you grieved for someone that's left your life? And it's something that touches us deeply. And it takes a while to go through the grieving process. All of his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he could not be comforted. He said, I will be sad about my son until the day I die. So Jacob cried for his son Joseph. The sadness that came to him. The treatment that he had given to Joseph, as Larry pointed out, caused him much grief, not only to Jacob, but to the entire family. Meanwhile, the scriptures say, the Midianites who had bought Joseph had taken him to Egypt, and they sold him to Potiphar, an officer to the king of Egypt and captain of the palace guard. Thus we see how Joseph makes his way down to Egypt. Now, one of the challenges of the scripture is that the stories may not be back to back the way we remember them from a kid, but as we examine the scriptures, we need to take the stories that are presented and understand them in the context of what's going of the scripture and this path that's being laid out to Jesus, the coming of Jesus. And we need to understand that this is something we need to at least understand what the scriptures say. This next story in Genesis 38. Now, before we get into that, anybody have any comments on chapter 37? Yes, go ahead. Yes, and what Joel's saying is that this coat was extremely symbolic. It was long, long sleeve down to feet. It wasn't a working coat. We look at these suits we wear these days. This isn't really a working suit. I mean, I'm not going to be harvesting wheat with this. I mean, I could, but it's going to get torn up real quick. And so it was very a symbol of royalty. It was special. It was ornate. Well, I don't know how ornate it was, but it's certainly, when somebody looked at it, they knew exactly it wasn't a working coat. It was one of royalty, one of being in charge. Anybody else? Nice. I don't know if it's a nice story or if it's a story that we just remember a lot of. I feel sorry for Joseph, but I also know the end of the story, and the end is an amazing story. When you look at chapter 38, I thought very seriously about putting up here, you know how whenever there's news media puts out some kind of graphic story, that there's carnage. Well, no, that I wasn't planning on being here at this point, but we only have 5 minutes, so I won't get too deep in this story. You know how the news media, when they show a graphic accident, some kind of tragedy that's going on, they advise you graphic material coming up, viewer discretion advised. Well, I thought about putting that up on this slide. Those of you who are familiar with this story, it is can be uncomfortable, and most of you sitting out there are saying, "I'm glad Wendell's teaching this and not me." It is a challenging story, and if you just want some good reading or just some reading, go out there and just read what the writers have said about this. The basis for a lot of doctrinal teaching comes from this story, both good and bad. It's a nice challenge. This chapter is also used by critics of the Bible, agnostics, atheists, to say why they don't believe in this God, this, as they term it, unjust God, unfair God, a mean God. And so they'll point at this, and there's many, they have their logic and their reasoning, but I would appeal to you to look at this just as what's in the Scripture. Read through it and know the story so that you can better understand and better compare the writings of the folks that you'll read about this particular passage. And again, it would be nice if we had a little more context are surrounding this story, but we only have what's here. Let's get started, but not too deep. I want to remind you where we're at. About that time, Judah left his brothers. We're starting in verse 1 of 38. And we'll only get a couple of verses here. And Judah left his brothers and went to stay with a man named Hira in the town of Adullam. And so remember, they're living in about this area. And if I can locate Adullam, right, is over here. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's the area where Judah has gone. So he's gone out of the valley of Hebron, and there Judah met a Canaanite girl, the daughter of a man named Shua, and married her. Judah had sexual relations with her, and she became pregnant, gave birth to a son, whom Judah named Later she gave birth to another son, named him Onan, and still later she had another son and named him Shelah, and she was at Kitzib when this third son was born. Now, I just want to point something out. That wife, that woman, we don't even know her name. And so you'll see family trees, if you will, and they'll put the father's name in there. So this, for whatever reason, the Bible doesn't tell us her name. You'd think that would have been important to know at least her name for this story, but we don't have her name. So I just find that a fascinating event. And so here we have Judah going over to this area. He has 3 sons by this gal that he meets. We have no surrounding context. Did he meet her at the well? Did he go into some event in town and meet this girl? We just don't know. And we don't even have her name. But yet, this is quite the story we'll get into next week, I promise. And so if you would like to, your assignment this week is to read ahead, number 1. And if you'd like, find some what others have written about it. You can find a lot of information online. Be careful. Just because it's online doesn't mean it's truthful. But if you got any other resources to review, just review it, and set aside the uncomfortable nature of it, and just look at the logic and the reasoning that's going on in this story as we progress through it. Any questions or comments at this point before the next bell rings? Yes, sir.
That's not our society, so we really don't understand a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, Abraham Lincoln, I see Marcia says not everything on the internet is true, and Abraham Lincoln said that. But this is not, as he also pointed out, this is not our society that we're reading about. This is not our culture. And we're going to see that immediately. We're going to say, why would anybody allow that to happen? Well, it's not our culture. We've got to keep that in mind. Thank you very much for your attention.